Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, good morning, everyone. Of course, we are studying Swami Prabhavananda's collection of talks called Realizing God. That's the book in which it was published, as which it was published. And we are just concluding his talk on silence. We don't have a quorum. I wonder if we should wait a minute or two and see if anybody else shows up.
I think we should, because it's only 12:02 and it's raining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can wait. That's fine.
Well, let's wait a couple of minutes and see if anybody else shows up. In any event, even if they don't, I think we'll just go ahead, because I don't want to continue this over until the beginning of the year.
We do have a quorum, though, because there's Shiva.
How true.
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
I like that.
Yeah, 5 of us. Yeah, we've got a quorum. Like I told Brother Shankara, I don't know if he understands everything we say, but I do believe he picks up on the vibes because he does seem to enjoy these meetings. So he's part of our crew.
Well, we just very much enjoy having him with us.
So do I. He's great.
Davy does not, our Davy cat here does not much relate to human activities. She definitely does not like the phone. She doesn't like machines operating.
Well, that reminds me, I think the reason he went and sat in your lap when we came over is he's used to hearing your voice from these meetings. And I also watch them on replays too, because sometimes when I ask a question, you answer it, I get more out of it hearing it a second time. So he actually watches these meetings and hears the replays. So he's very used to your voice.
Hello there, Shiva. I am so glad that you are used to my voice, and I'm very used to your
We got the quorum.
Now
Balakrishna
we
is
have
here.
hello, Balaji, namaste. Okay, we will start the reading. Going into silence conveys two ideas. Silence is the method and also the goal. But the idea of silence is often misunderstood. I have known some so-called holy men carrying a slate with them, taking a vow of silence and writing on the slate. Another misunderstanding is that silence is to make the mind blank, not to think of anything. Is that possible? Only in two extremes. One which has become like a jellyfish, and one who lives in blissful consciousness. One time Sri Ramakrishna's disciples asked him, "Tell us about that experience." He said, "I will try." The moment he tried, he would go into Samadhi. There would be silence. So, as it is said in the Upanishads, his name is silence, capital S, silence. His name is silence. And of course, this has been affirmed as if it needed affirmation, but it has been affirmed by many saints of various traditions, in particular Meister Eckhart of the Catholic tradition. He lived in the late 1200s and the early 1300s. He said, "There is a great silence that calls to us from within. It is very beneficial to answer that call." So his name is silence. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the illustration of a salt doll trying to find the depth of the ocean. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the illustration of a salt doll trying to find the depth of the ocean. It melted away. Narada gave the illustration of a dumb man trying to express the taste of delicious food. Narada gave the illustration of a dumb, in other words, a person who couldn't speak, a dumb man trying to express the taste of delicious food. Shankara pointed out, this state of silence is a state of complete peace in which the intellect ceases to occupy itself with the unreal. In this silence, the great soul who knows and is one with Brahman enjoys unmingled bliss forever. Now, the word unmingled or unalloyed is really quite remarkable, because within time, space, and causation, there is no such thing as an unalloyed or unmingled experience. It's always a combination of the three gunas. So Shankara pointed out, this state of silence is a state of complete peace in which the intellect ceases to occupy itself with the unreal. In other words, the superimposition of the unreal on the real is not present. In this silence, the great soul who knows and is one with Brahman enjoys unmingled bliss forever. Now, we don't understand when we read the word forever. We get some inkling of, eternity, but we really don't know what that means. There's no such thing as the ability to understand infinity or the eternity with the finite mind. But many scriptures, and of course Adi Shankaracharya is saying that it is true. So before we go on, are there any comments or questions about this particular aspect, the silence being misunderstood, and then the definition of what silence is? Anything at all?
Shankara, Hari Om.
Hari Om, dear.
I just wanted to know when we say silence, are we going to be keep in the mind chanting the mantra? I mean, but not.
Look, I understand the question. Is there something more you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, because that's what the previous para, what we read last week, Vivekananda says, when the horses are running down the hill, galloping, you have to hold the reins to make it stand still. That is silence. So in order to do that, so we have to keep chanting our mantra in the mind.
Well, what happens is you chant the mantra, and then just as you sink below the thoughts or the occupations of the intellect, as Shankaracharya puts it, you sink below the mantra. The mantra continues of its own. As a matter of fact, if you chant your mantra for some years, you'll find that it's always going on in your mind. It'll come to you spontaneously at unexpected times when it's needed. But you sink below it into a different realm. It is a realm apart from time, space, and causation, in that time, space, and causation doesn't seem to have an effect there, though because you are still experiencing it, it is by definition within time, space, and causation. But it seems to be a different realm. This is what saying that Om Asato chant, the translation or the interpretation is, lead us from this realm of noisy confusion and delusion to thine abode of serenity, silence, and clarity. So the mantra continues just as the thoughts continue. As Swami Prabhavananda just got finished pointing out, the mind doesn't become blank. You simply turn your attention away from those thoughts. You sink below those thoughts, so to speak. And so when you're chanting the mantra, you also sink below the mantra into that great silence. Does that make sense, Balakrishna?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. And that's what actually happens. Thank you for that question. A very, very right on point question. Anything else from anyone before we go on?
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
I think I've asked this question before and you have answered as well, but just one more time. So when we are doing the mantra and the mind wants to wander away, one of the, I guess, ways to ask is does that deserve your attention, and then release it rather than fight with it. Is that
Exactly. Do not struggle with the train of thought that your mind has run off on. You know, it's jumped on a train of thought and it's headed off in some direction or another, into the past or into the future. Usually, those are usually the way it works, although it could be nothing more than an itch or an ache in your foot. But if you just simply pose that question, does this deserve my attention? And after a time, you don't even have to pose the question. You simply know the answer already. The mantra is much more deserving of my attention than this train of thought I've gotten on. So you jump off the train and go back to chanting your mantra, which is walking down the tracks in the other direction, so to speak, and because the train of thought will lead you into, just more of the sameness or even downwards sometimes. So you can promise your mind, if it seems like something that the mind really wants to deal with, some problem that you have, or some challenge that's arisen, or some anguish that's being suffered, you can promise your mind, we'll take this up after I'm finished here. We'll take this up. We'll address this. But then just resolutely turn your attention away from that and back to the mantra. That get it?
Thank you. Yes, it did.
Actually, Sarvapriyananda says in a similar way, when you start your meditation, tell the mind, oh mind, whatever you can offer me, I do not need them. What I need, you cannot offer.
Well, as long as your mind doesn't argue back. I have a mind that will argue back with that. Well, I mean, quite literally. This masks itself as a kind of intelligence, a kind of worldly wisdom, of which Arjuna was, had. I don't mean to compare myself with Arjuna, but it was that same thing that Krishna says to him, well, Arjuna, your words are wise, but you're mistaken. And so I don't do that with my mind. I don't say those kinds of things to my mind. I'm not saying that others shouldn't. But I just simply say, not now, not now, if the mind is insistent, not now. And so then we go on with the mantra, or there are times when it isn't the mantra, it's some sort of other contemplation or concentration that's going on some particular spiritual aspect or idea. So, very good comments and questions.
And
This is
along
just
the lines of not now, I find it useful to have a pencil and paper nearby. If there's something I absolutely have to do later, I can just quickly scribble it down, get back. And
that's a brilliant idea. I think Cindy also does that. As a matter of fact, I know she does. So I don't. What Brahmadas just said, Cindy, is that when he's sitting for the practice of meditation, and something comes up that really does need to be dealt with later, he'll write himself a note about it. He has pencil and paper nearby, and though your practice isn't exactly parallel to that, I know that you also have a notebook and a writing instrument nearby so that you can note things down and then go on with whatever it is that you are doing in the way of practice.
Right. Otherwise, your mind is filled with anxiety, thinking, "Oh, I got to remember to do this. I got to remember to do this."
Right. Exactly. Yeah. What happens, because I often am writing a poem called a tanka, the idea will come to me before I go into the shrine. Oftentimes the mind will want to occupy itself with finessing or finishing that tanka. And that's one of the most difficult for me. Because the mind is trying to do its craft. So then I just have to say, no, not now.
Yeah.
And, we'll get to that. Thank you for your contributions, but just not now. And go back to what I'm doing. And sometimes it's a bit of a tussle.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
Yeah, sometimes, like when my mind wanders off, for example, to cooking, when I'm doing the mantra, then I ask my mind, well, if you want to wander to cooking now, when you're cooking, will you think of the mantra?
Good question. You know, Swami, oh, come on, Yogatmananda, Swami Yogatmananda from Providence says, you know, his practice is if the mind is just so preoccupied with something, like wanting a cup of tea is the example that he uses. He says, and it just keeps returning to that, which is just a message from the Annamaya kosha, you know, the food body, which can be very insistent. He'll say, all right, we'll have that cup of tea. And he'll get up and he'll have that cup of tea. But with the promise and the understanding that as soon as they're finished with the cup of tea, they'll come back and sit to continue. So, you know, and I just thought this was, when I heard this from him, I thought how intelligent, you know, the Annamaya kosha, our gross body can be very insistent, and that those thoughts of cooking or what is going, those are also part of the messages from the Annamaya kosha. And so, you know, we do the very best we can, don't we?
And when you say Annamaya kosha, what does that mean?
It means the food body.
The food body.
Annamaya is the food body, the grossest of our aspects. You know, the outer covering. You know, below that is the energy body, the pranamaya kosha, and so on. And they cooperate a lot, and they also argue a lot. But the Annamaya kosha is, you know, whenever you have a thought of food or that kind of thing, there's no reason to be upset about it at all. It's just the Annamaya kosha sounding off. So it's going to. But you can say, either you can do, if it's, as Yogatmananda said, if it's just absolutely insistent, then you just say, all right, we'll cooperate. We'll go along with you.
I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think, you know, a lot of us probably have a routine.
Yes.
And which is good, because by having a routine for other things, then usually when we do our meditation, or generally, you know, our regular meditation, we've already taken care of the that kosha need. You know, we've had our tea already, or our coffee, or our breakfast, or whatever, or it's so early in the day that we don't even want those things yet, which is kind of how I do it. But yeah, I mean, if you ignore the needs of your food body, you're not going to have as good of a sit, so to speak.
Well,
true. And in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says yoga is not for those who fast too much.
Oh yeah, you mustn't try to abuse the food body by fasting too much and all that kind of thing. But I think Yogatmananda's insight, or what he communicated, is also an acknowledgement of something that all of the mystics say, and that is there is nothing about us that is not sacred. And Sri Ramakrishna says this also. He says this is vijnana, this is the special knowledge that comes, that the 24 cosmic principles of Sankhya and their results, one of which is, of course, the Annamaya Kosha, the food body, that all of this is sacred. So there's no reason to relegate it to some lower realm. So Yogatmananda says, if there's just this insistence, no, I want a cup of tea now. I want a cup of tea now. He says, well, just get up and have a cup of tea. But with the understanding and the vow that when you're finished with the tea, you'll come back and go back to your practice. And I think that is a powerful insight of the saints. And it's from knowledge, it's not intellect. It's from knowledge that everything about us is sacred. St. John of the Cross says this very explicitly. And so does Rabia, for that matter. Two very different people from two very different times. Both, interestingly, having suffered terrible persecution. Anything else?
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe
Yes.
you could explain that metaphor, what Swami is giving in the previous para. Is that possible only in two extremes? One who has become like a jellyfish and one who lives in blissful consciousness.
Well, when you live in blissful consciousness, the mind seems to be blank. But it's not really blank. The gunas are going on doing their job and having their effect on your mental impressions. It's simply that your awareness is not there. This is why I differentiate between those two words. Consciousness. Consciousness is part of all of it. Or all of it is part of consciousness. Your awareness or your attention is what you can control. As Swami Turiyananda was able to control his awareness to such an extent that he could be operated on for a very serious condition without anesthetic, and in those days the wound be closed by cauterization with a red-hot iron, and he didn't betray any awareness that this was happening. Then later, a couple of days later, his attendant, without telling the Swami what he was going to do, went to change the dressing and pulled it from where the wound was, and the Swami yelped. And the attendant was puzzled. He says, well, you know, I sat there, watched you go through this operation and not betray that there was anything happening. And now when I change the dressing, or start to change the dressing, you yelp. And the Swami says, yes, but you didn't tell me that you were going to do it. In other words, I had no opportunity to move my awareness elsewhere. Now, the business about the jellyfish, I so like the Swami to use such an image. The jellyfish, of course, has no form, no shape, it's just whatever shape it needs to be at any given moment, but it's affected by everything. And so this is a kind of unconsciousness. This is a kind of mindlessness. The jellyfish doesn't apparently have any brain center. It has a nervous system, but it doesn't apparently have any brain center. So does all that work?
Yes, yes.
Okay, very good. And I'm glad you asked. Anything else from anyone? Okay. The method is to still the passions of the mind and become one with God. Meister Eckhart realized his oneness with Godhead. He said, ordinary people think God is over there, and I am here. But God and I are one. And of course, if we take seriously the words like omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, if we take those, even if we take those seriously intellectually, there can be nothing but God. So it isn't that God is over there, because that would mean that there was some separation in the omnipresence. It's not possible. There is no separation. So when Meister Eckhart, who of course realized this at a far deeper level than the intellect, I mean, all of his teachings betray this. I just shouldn't say all of his teachings, all the teachings I'm familiar with betray this. So there is no over there. It's all presence, omnipresence. So I'll read that again. The method is to still the passions of the mind, that is to say, the effects of the gunas on our past mental impressions, samskaras and vasanas. The method is to still the passions of the mind and become one with God. Now, when the Swami says still them, as he said before, they don't really become stilled. You just simply you cease being aware of them. So all of that stuff is going on. But it's true that as your breathing slows, the prana is not available to the gunas to excite the mind as much. So as you practice concentration and meditation, your breathing will slow and even stop for a period of time. You don't know how long a time. It's usually quite short, but nevertheless, you have this state called kumbhaka. And in that moment, there don't seem to be any thoughts. There's an interval. It isn't that they've stopped altogether. There's just an interval where they're not there. This is what happens when you practice. So that's stilling the passions of the mind. The method is to still the passions of the mind and become one with God. Meister Eckhart realized his oneness with Godhead. He said, ordinary people think God is over there and I am here, but God and I are one. The Upanishads teach that God is to be realized here and now, not after the death of the body. Let me read that again. It's such an important point. The Upanishads teach that God is to be realized here and now, not after the death of the body. There is a saying in our country that when a husking machine goes to heaven, what does it do? Husk. So if you're a husking machine, if you're an intellect machine, when you go to heaven, you'll continue to be an intellect machine. That's not God realization. So there's a saying in our country that when a husking machine goes to heaven, what does it do? Husk. So in this very life, we have to attain freedom from the shackles of karma and reincarnation, which is possible only by realizing the ultimate truth. Now, because of who's here with us today, I can say this and not seem to be an evangelist. Sri Ramakrishna came for no other reason than to help us with just exactly this, to break the shackles of karma and reincarnation and help us realize the ultimate truth. If you want to understand what I mean by that, just read Vivekananda's Khandana Bhavana in English translation, which is Breaker of This World's Chain. And just the title says it all. Sri Ramakrishna came to break the chain that binds us to this world. So, and there's other assertions and affirmations throughout Vivekananda's hymn. How great was thy sacrifice, freely choosing thy birth in this prison, our iron age, to unchain us and set us free. Thou hast finished with fear and with doubt, standing firm in the vision of God. One of the gifts of the incarnation of Ishvara, Ishwari, is that they can share this with us. They can share this triumph over fear and doubt. Any comments or questions about that aspect?
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quote I saw very recently that said, I think I'm saying it right. I always thought I wanted to be a poet, but deep down, I really wanted to be a poem.
Yes.
And I just loved it because, I immediately applied it to, all my life I thought I wanted to be a singer, but deep down, I really just wanted to be a song. I mean, you can say it about anything that, because the poet or the writer or the singer is the food body doing a thing. But the result, the song, the poem, whatever, is not them. It's something else. It's the divine.
Yes.
And those are,
Go ahead, please.
well, just also the act of offering, even if the husking machine could learn to offer its husking activity, then when it went to heaven, it might not husk anymore. I mean, I don't know, but you know what I'm trying to say, but I'm done. Okay.
Well, beautiful and so apt. What we want to be is that creative being, that we want to be the divine. There is only one being. So all creativity, all bliss, all everything comes from that one being. It's summarized as Satchidananda, but that's just a summary statement. It infuses, it interpenetrates everything. as Sri Ramakrishna uses the metaphor of a handful of salt in a glass of water. As long as the salt is apart from the water, you can see there's water and there's salt. The minute you put the salt into the water, stir it up, you have salty water, but you can no longer detect the salt apart from the water. That creative energy, all of the energies, are manifest in us. And so, yes, we don't want to be the result. We don't want to be the act of creating. We want to be the thing itself. And this is so beautiful. Do you remember the name of that Spaniard who said that? Because you said it the other day. Just in case anybody wants to look it up.
I can find it. I'll find it and put it in the chat.
Okay, if it's easy, don't make it.
No, it is easy. I just don't remember the name off the top of my head. I'll have to look at it again.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is it. We don't want to be the activity. We want to be that which is creating the activity and the result. Thank you, Cindy, for bringing that up. That's exactly the case.
Okay, I just posted it.
Thank you.
It's a Spanish. He's Spanish, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try.
Okay. So anything else before we read on?
Brother Shankara, I have one comment. One of the illumined souls said, I don't want to be called nice. I want to become nice.
Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yes. And another way of saying it is I no longer want to taste sugar. I want to be the sugar. And Brahmananda said, for those people who say, I don't want to be the sugar, I want to taste the sugar. He said, that's a temporary condition. Until you really taste the sugar, then you want to be the sugar. So you see, we are all running after pleasures, joy and happiness. And we do not know that there is unmingled joy that knows no end, only in God and nowhere else. Let me read that again. You see, we are all, and notice that the Swami doesn't exclude himself. You see, we are all running after pleasures, joy and happiness. And we do not know that there is unmingled joy that knows no end, only in God and nowhere else. Now, if you would have asked the Swami, he would have said, well, yes, I do know this, but I still fix my spaghetti. He loved spaghetti, and he used to fix spaghetti bolognese. He was known for it. So it isn't as if he didn't enjoy the pleasures of the Annamaya Kosha. He did. He also told us that there were no calories in Prasad. That if you ate a piece of pie after a puja that had been offered, the pie had been offered, and was therefore Prasad, that there were no calories in it. So by that he meant there was no harm in it. Yes, Balakrishna.
All the calories were taken by God.
Yes, all the calories have been taken by God. Very good. There is unmingled joy that knows no end, only in God and nowhere else. That God is your very nature. You are that. You have only to be aware of it. And notice that this Swami now uses the word aware or awareness. It isn't that it is somewhere else. It is within you. And it is by sinking into that silence that there a different kind of communication occurs. And this is described very beautifully by Meister Eckhart. The fact that there is a voice in that silence, but it's not a voice that speaks in words or in sound, but it infuses you. It simply fills you with the knowledge. And of course, St. Teresa of Avila says the same thing, and Rabia says the same thing, Hafiz says the same thing. All of these great saints say that there is a voice within you that does not speak in words or sound that will tell you everything you need to know.
And would that voice be the higher self?
Yes, it is the self. It is the self, capital S, yes, or capital H, capital S. Yes, it is. But, we can have no conceptualization of it. We can only experience it. We cannot understand it in any way by our intellect. We can say those words, and you're right to say those words. Higher self. Yes, that's what it is. But we will never understand those words intellectually. We can only experience it in that silence. Thanks, Brahmadas. Anything else from anyone? Okay. From an ancient source quoted by Shankara, we hear, silence is his name. In silence alone he can be known, he can be realized. And that's what I mean. That communication comes from the silence. And Meister Eckhart even says that silence is constantly calling to us, inviting us. There is a great silence within us that calls to us, he says. In that silence alone, he can be known, he can be realized. We learned from the disciples, by we, the Swami meant himself and his fellow, his brother monks. We learned from the disciples of Ramakrishna that by merely looking at a disciple in silence, he would awaken spiritual consciousness in the disciple. We learned from the disciples of Ramakrishna that by merely looking at a disciple in silence, he, Sri Ramakrishna, would awaken spiritual consciousness in the disciple. Do we think Sri Ramakrishna's gone anywhere? Every one of those who spoke for Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Vivekananda, Prabhavananda, the other direct disciples, say that he is present, and he is especially present to you when you look at his picture. He is in that picture and is alive in that picture and can look at you from that picture and awaken your spiritual consciousness. Anyone who has reached superconscious vision, anyone who has reached superconscious vision or any ecstasy will tell you that you go into a deep silence. The whole universe disappears. Why does it disappear? Because you have left behind the 5 organs of action and the 5 organs of perception. Through the action of the gunas, that's what creates this universe. The universe doesn't really exist as we perceive it. It's only vibration. This incredible machine we inhabit turns that vibration into the universe that we perceive. And so he says, the Swami says, anyone who's attained superconscious vision or any ecstasy will tell you, you go into a deep silence, the whole universe disappears. In that silence, there is no effect of the gunas. You are still aware, that is to say, you're aware that the universe has disappeared. So it's not nirvikalpa samadhi. He's talking about savikalpa samadhi. Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Often it seems in the beginning like we are going to be drowned in that lonely ocean, and we resist it. Why lonely? Because we leave behind our relationships. This is why it says in the evening prayer, breaker of this world's chain, those who have cast fame, fortune, and friends away. It seems that in that silence, we're leaving behind everyone. In fact, what we're doing is we're coming to understand everyone that we're in relationship with very, very much better. Because when we find that divinity in ourselves, we can then also see it in others. So we understand then that this separation is an illusion or delusion. But in the beginning, it feels like we're going to be drowned in that lonely ocean, and we resist it. Yes, we do. I've heard people say, "Oh, I felt like I was falling into an abyss," and I struggled back out of it. Well and good. At some point, they will be willing to fall into that abyss and be glad they did. But as Sri Ramakrishna said over and over, all things happen at the proper time. So we're not going to be drowned in that lonely ocean. In Chaitanya's prayer, it says, "A drowning man in this world's fearful ocean is thy servant, O sweet one. In thy mercy, consider him as dust beneath thy feet." A drowning man in this world's fearful ocean is thy servant, O sweet one. In thy mercy, consider him as dust beneath thy feet. So it when you're dust beneath the feet, you are one with those feet. The feet are against the dust, and the dust is against the feet. Thou art mine, and I am thine. That's the last barrier. It goes on to say, ah, how I long for the day when an instant separation from thee, O Govinda, will be as 1,000 years, when my heart burns away with its desire, and the world without thee is a heartless world. So it is that union still in awareness. Thou art the whole, I am the part. This is Savikalpa Samadhi. So in the beginning, we feel like we're going to be drowned in a lonely ocean, and we resist it. Then, of course, we don't go into that silence. But try again. When you go into complete silence, your whole vision changes, and you come face to face with the reality. That is the stillness. And when it says your whole vision changes, this is exactly the truth. You can no longer see the world and your experience of universe in the same way. Because know now from an empirical experience of this other, what he terms the reality, capital R. You have come face to face with the reality. This is the stillness. And it is an actual experience. Yes, it is an actual experience. So, anything else before we go on? He's about to pivot a little bit and talk about samskaras and so
on. Talking about Ramakrishna still being present, in volume 9 of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, there's an interesting letter written by Swamiji to Maharaja of K3 in February of 1893, where he talks to the Maharaja about his experience with a sort of astrologer in Kerala. That man could tell anything what another man was thinking about. And that episode is pretty long, so I don't want to take too much time. It's very interesting. But one of the answers that the man had written in a piece of paper, even before Swamiji had sort of thought of the questions in his mind, was that Sri Ramakrishna is dead, but he lives in Sukshma, the ethereal body, and is watching over you.
Yes, that's what Sri Ramakrishna said, that he would remain in his subtle body or ethereal body for 200 years after he left the physical body in 1886. So 200 years is 2086. And that he would return to human form. And he would return as a Baul. But he would be completely unknown this time. He would not be, but he would bring that great force of spirituality into the world that he brought each time, that he brings each time he takes that manifestation. And interestingly, what are Bauls? Bauls are wandering minstrels. Wandering, they have no fixed home. The real Bauls. There are some that play Baul instruments and sing Baul songs, and they're not the traditional Baul that has no fixed place of residence. I think Sri Ramakrishna meant he would be that latter kind, that kind that doesn't have any fixed residence. And so what does this mean? He would go from place to place And every place that he sang, everyone he looked upon, everyone he gazed upon would be liberated. This is what is said, that the very look, this was said of Sri Chaitanya, that whoever he looked upon was liberated. So you can imagine, the world is becoming a strange and different place. 2086, it's bound to be pretty much along that path, climate change, all this business. Sri Ramakrishna wandering through the world, looking at people. And who knows, he may be one of those Baul groups that actually travels internationally. There are some. Some came to Hollywood during the time that I was part of that congregation. And they were traditional Bauls. They had no fixed residence. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Swami. Our samskaras, our impressions of the past, force us to go through worldly experiences. I'll say that again because it's such a key point. This is what brings us to the worldly experiences that we have. Our samskaras, our impressions of the past, force us to go through worldly experiences. It's because that's what we expect. That's what we know. We know the name and form of those experiences. And so that's what we expect. And so that's what we receive. But if we keep the ideal in view, gradually we overcome them and gain self-mastery. In other words, we no longer, we have enough experience of the divine presence that we no longer expect what we knew from the past. We no longer expect the familiar. As the Swami said, your vision changes. And so gradually we overcome them and gain self-mastery. Self-mastery means you no longer cooperate with your samskaras and those things that prompt you to what was in the past. Soft ice cream, other trivial, this is a trivial example, but a real one. You just aren't impelled toward them anymore. They don't have a grip on you. So this is what's meant by self-mastery. And so the Swami says, never, never compromise the ideal. Always, even if you're not attaining it, don't compromise it. Don't say, well, this is good enough. No, it's good enough for the moment, but it's not good enough. The ideal is good enough. But don't beat yourself up about it either. That serves no purpose whatsoever. It simply means you haven't gained full self-mastery yet. Never, never compromise the ideal. Self-mastery, purity of heart, complete absorption in God are the ideals you must not compromise. So this is what is so puzzling to so many people. That I can hold two thoughts at the same time. The thoughts and aspirations of the ideal and the santosha, the contentment of how far I have come. Because if we keep on keeping on, we will achieve the two thoughts will become one. Is that clear to everyone what I mean by the two thoughts? Holding the thoughts of the ideal and also having this santosha, this contentment, not self-satisfaction, but contentment with the fact that I am making progress, I am on the path. Is all that clear? Okay. So I'll just read again. Never, never compromise the ideal. Self-mastery is the ideal. Purity of heart is the ideal. Complete absorption in God are the ideals you must not compromise. That's what it is that you're after. Even though you don't, then we can't know intellectually exactly what that means. Complete absorption in God. We can't really even know what self-mastery or complete purity of heart are. We know as we get closer, we get glimpses, and then it becomes more and more present, and finally there's some deeper sense. Yes, we all have weaknesses and human desires, but if you keep the ideal in view, you will gain mastery. Now notice that the Swami does not qualify that in any way. Yes, we all have weaknesses and human desires, and this is what I mean. We must have santosha about that. We must have contentment with that this is a fact of taking this form. Yes, we all have weaknesses and human desires, but if you keep the ideal in view, you will gain mastery. It will come to you suddenly one day. That's what's meant by Savikalpa Samadhi. You will have this experience of Savikalpa Samadhi suddenly one day. And the Swami Prabhavananda said, live in expectation of it. And when that happens, what occurs is everything that is of time, space, and causation, everything else that is of time, space, and causation is forced to the periphery. It's simply not present to your awareness. The only thing that is present to your awareness is the divine presence. But it isn't, you're still aware of it. It's still an experience. But it's all you're aware of. And you seem to be a part of that. This isn't a question of seeming. You know yourself to be a part of that. Now, when that experience ends, then all of the birds come back and roost in the trees. Even all of their experiences, but as the Swami says, your vision of them has completely changed. Any comments or questions? You will gain mastery. It will come to you suddenly one day.
pardon me if my question sounds silly or stupid, but
Oh, dear, never, ever say that.
Okay.
Don't minimize yourself in that way.
Okay. My question is, does the Samadhi experience come only when one is sitting in meditation?
No.
Or can it come during when is occupied in worldly activities?
It's more likely to come when you are sitting and sinking into the silence, but it can come in other kinds of activity. It may come in a dream. The story of Scrooge is the story of a man who is transformed overnight by his experiences while he's in bed, but his spirit is taken by other forms of spirit and shown his past, his present, and his future. And at the end of that night, he awakens saying, I am not the man I was. I am not the man I was. I am not the man I was. And he isn't. And he says to his clerk the next morning, I have not taken leave of my senses, Bob. I have come to them. And if you want to understand fully what that means, it's in the book Divine Grace. To be fully human is to be fully divine. There is no aspect of us that is not sacred. It's just our misunderstanding of it seems to make it not sacred.
Thank you.
So it can happen anytime. And Swami Prabhavananda was very clear that you should live in expectation of it every moment, every moment. That's his fourth instruction for meditation, because meditation isn't just something that you do sitting on the cushion. You begin to meditate essentially all the time. Anything else? Thank you. And please, 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 Swayam, never minimize yourself that way.
No,
Never.
I won't.
No, just don't. It's not a question of that. Your questions are sincere, and they cannot be thought of as anything other than that. That's true of everyone who's here. That's why we take this prayer that we open with so seriously. There's only one wisdom. There's only one. Here it seems to be that there are 9. But there are not 9. And so the wisdom may come in the form of a question or a comment from any one of us at any moment. Sure, nominally, this is the facilitator for all of this, and the reader and the commentator and blah, blah, blah. But that's just so it will happen. That's just so it will happen. Thou art that. Thou art that. So anything else before we read on? If you try day by day to love God, to concentrate on Him. So that's the sentence, the end of that sentence. If you keep the ideal in view, you will gain mastery. It will come to you suddenly one day if you try day by day to love God, to concentrate on Him. Never cover your weaknesses with gold leaf. Know them and you will overcome them. Gradually you will find yourself free from them and will reach that state when your mind becomes absorbed in the Atman and nothing else. Notice that Swami doesn't say that will all happen at once one day. Gradually, you find yourself free from them and will reach that state when your mind becomes absorbed in the Atman and nothing else. But we don't know when that's going to happen. And it is our continued experience of the silence and being free from the thoughts for those moments, for that time, or being absorbed only in the thought of the divine, which one way to do that is the mantra. There are many ways. But you then sink below that, and something speaks to you that is transformative, that changes your vision, as the Swami says. You look out on the world differently. And your mind then becomes absorbed in the Atman and nothing else. And of course, we don't know what that means until it happens. We can get some idea of it. But that is Savikalpa Samadhi. Your mind is absorbed in the Atman and nothing else. That's what I mean. Everything else is shoved to the periphery. There is nothing else but that divine presence, that living presence, the Atman, in those moments. According to yoga psychology, union with God is deemed as control of the waves of the mind. That's the first sutra in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Yoga is stilling the waves of the mind, the thought waves of the mind. The mind is lashed into waves, and purity of heart is to make it calm and clear. So there's a very short, sweet definition. Yoga, union with God, is deemed as control of the waves of the mind. The mind is lashed into waves by the gunas, affecting our samskaras. The mind is lashed into waves, and purity of heart is to make it calm and clear. That is all there is to it. If you can imagine, that's all there is to it. So there's no reason to despair, even when we fall into those troughs where there's nothing, it seems, but dryness or mud mind or whatever it is. We just keep practicing. As Swami Vivekananda says, when you're in one of those troughs, what's happening is you are gathering energy for an even greater peak, an even greater wave of realization. So not to despair, not to be upset. So then the Swami repeats essentially what Vivekananda says, not in temples and churches, Not in books can you find religion and God, but in yourself, in your own consciousness. There is that presence of God. This truth becomes revealed. According to yoga psychology, union with God is deemed as control of the waves of the mind. The mind is lashed into waves, and purity of heart is to make it calm and clear. That's all there is to it. Not in temples and churches, not in books can you find religion and God. You can find sattva in temples and churches. Sattva is the revealing power. It isn't that we shouldn't go to temples and churches. No. But that revealing power can take you only to that point where it points you in the direction of the truth. So not in temples and churches, not in books. What can books do? Books can give you that which your mind needs to chew on, so to speak. The books are the Shravana. Your contemplation of what is taught in the books is the Manana. And the replacement of the lower samskaras with the higher samskaras that you found in the books is the Nididhyasana. It is the insistence on the truth that you found in the books. But you are finding that truth that is in yourself. Not in temples, not in churches, not in books can you find religion and God, but in yourself, in your own consciousness. There is that presence of God. The truth becomes revealed, which is the end of this talk, and I think the end of the book. Is it really 22 minutes after 1?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it
My
is.
God, I had
Yep.
no idea. Well, that's it. Is there anything from anyone? I mean, I'm not, when I remarked on the time, I was just remarking on it. There's no urgency to leave your company. So anything else that anyone would like to add or ask?
Just want to
Really?
say it is so ecstatic, Brother Shankara. The last two sentences were even more ecstatic. The closing ones. He gave us so many tools to find ourselves.
Yes.
It's a wonderful book. That's
Yes,
all.
it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for leading us to this. It has been a wonderful journey.
The Swami himself would take no credit. When he spoke on Mother and was complimented on it, he said, "Who spoke?" And when the disciple finally answered, "Mother, Swami," he said, "That's right." So it is only the one that is speaking through these books, through these meetings. It is the one. There are now, I guess, 8 of us. That appear to be present. The truth is, there is only one appearing as these many. So that is our experience, that there are many. Who can deny it? But we know from what the Swami has said through this wonderful book, through many, many, many different places where we've done the Shravana, we've listened, we've read, we hear over and over that behind this appearance is the one. Thank you, Haim.
I just remembered this verse from Devi Mahatmyam. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Vritti Rupena Samstita. Namastasya, 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 Namo Namaha.
Which means?
That you are all the thought waves, vrittis.
Yes, exactly.
I remember that. We sung that with Swami Harinamananda when he came to present that lecture.
Yes, exactly. Salutations again and again to the mother who abides in all beings as consciousness, as memory, as activity, as hunger, thirst, as mother herself, and as error itself. Right at the end of the Sarvabhuteshus, it says, Mother, first it says, you abide as mother in all beings. And then it says, you also abide as error in all beings. Which is why I said, we must have santosha. We must have contentment that we are still in error, because it is the nature of mother, of time, space, and causation, of her Maya, of Atman with attributes, which is what she is. Thank you, Swami. Yes. It's always good to go over those Sarvabhuteshus because it tries to be comprehensive and help us understand that the divine presence is everything. No matter where we look, that's what we're seeing. Consciousness in that name and form. Anything else before we sign off?
Brother, this is Fred.
Yes, Fred.
I just want to say thank you for leading class, and also thank you to all class members. I've had to miss some classes lately, but I go to the website and it's so well organized, very easy to find the content, and so have been getting a lot out of that, this class and also the Jnana Yoga class. So thanks to all class members and you. Thank you.
Well, Fred, thank you for being part of this. The energy comes from each one of you. And yes, the website is easy to access and easy to find. Thanks to Cindy. Thanks to Mother in the form of Cindy. That's another thing that's said in the Chandi and the Devi Mahatmyam. All mythologies and scriptures are your aspects, O Devi. So are all women in the world endowed with their various attributes. Jai Ma, Jai Ma,
Jai Ma.
Jai Ma. And then, of course, Mirabai said, are not all souls female before God? So, anything else from any of you splendid people? All right, this is the last of the classes until the end of the year, until January. The things that will take place before the end of the year: tomorrow's talk on Raja Yoga of Lord Jesus Christ. And that, by the way, is an interesting and very informative story. The Sermon on the Mount, for example, is Christ's yamas and niyamas. I mean, it's what it is. He just enumerates, his version of the yamas and niyamas, and it's the Sermon on the Mount, and it's foundational, just like the foundation of Patanjali's yoga is in the first two limbs, the first two steps, the yamas and niyamas. And then, of course, there is the last part we'll hear about tomorrow, and that is what's in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, the tree with 7 limbs. And of course, we recognize the number 7 immediately. That will be the last talk of the year. And then there will be a simple worship and Christmas celebration, a celebration of Christ's birth on December 24th. And this year, just 2 days later, there will be a celebration of Holy Mother's birth. And there will again be a simple worship and some talk about her and readings and singing. There will be Christmas carols on the 24th and mother carols, if you will, on the 26th. Aditya Chaturvedi is out of town. He's up visiting his sister near Chicago. So we're just going to do a very simple, the same kind of worship that the mother did herself when she worshiped the master. And for that matter, at Koalpara, she actually did this kind of simple worship to worship her own picture. So that's the kind of worship we will do on the 26th. And that'll be it for the year until on December 31st, January 1st. Starting a few minutes before midnight, we'll do a midnight meditation, opening the new year so auspiciously. And then later that same day, January 1st, we'll have the observance of Kalpataru Day, the day in which Sri Ramakrishna gave liberation. Almost incidentally, it's so interesting, almost incidentally to 30 some odd devotees, disciples. So any final thought or comments from anyone? All right.
Brother Shankara, I just have one comment.
Yes.
The afterword, after this silence chapter, that is also worth reading by ourselves. It tells about Swami Prabhavananda and his disciples. It's really inspirational. I read it before, just wanted to mention to my, spiritual colleagues. That's all. It's only a few pages, but it's really worth reading.
Yes, this is the afterword. It's
afterward, exactly.
Yeah.
We can read it on our own.
And this is the contribution of his. Really, nothing can be said that is too complimentary of Nalini, Edith Tipple, the woman who assembled this book. Just imagine going through all of the Swami's talks from 1938 to 1976. 1938 to 1976. All the talks that he gave on the same subject, each one. He would give the same talk over and over, but it would change. So she went through, just say this talk on silence. You'll find little parenthetical numbers in there. That number refers to something that is in her notes, that lecture that was given on that particular time and day on silence. So she went through every one of the Swami's talks on silence and selected the best from each of them and combined them. That's why this one that concludes the book is so long, because there was so many gems from so many talks. But the same is true of his talk on Om or Krishna, or all of the talks that he gave on the subject Om. She went through them every one and found the best. Now, she didn't have them as computer files that she could work with like that. She had them as typescript, typed transcripts of the talks. So then
That's quite an undertaking that she's done, but I'm grateful because she's captured these teachings of the God-realized master as a legacy for us to appreciate.
Amen. Amen, Ramadas. Amen. That's why I said there's hardly anything can be said about Nalini that is too complimentary.
And to add what Haima said, Swami Yogishananda gets mentioned in this afterword, I see.
Yeah. Well, Swami Yogishananda, it was said that if you wanted to bring Swami Yogishananda to tears, which was not an easy thing to do, he was, that kind of fierce Swami. But it's said if you wanted to bring him to tears, just get him to talk about Swami Prabhavananda. His experience of Swami Prabhavananda would, in talking about the Swami, he would come to tears. So,
I remember that. He was talking about him and started crying once. I remember that now.
Well, I'm glad you remember it. That was a very sacred moment. Anything else from any of you? All right. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityor Ma Amrutangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from this realm of noisy confusion and delusion to thine abode of serenity, silence, and clarity. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. May you be safe. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. And may we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the divine being as our mother and father. So as this year winds down and we have these holy days of the Christian and other traditions, but of course, especially of the Christian, these are the days of Advent. If you're not familiar with that, these are the days leading up to the birth of Christ, the days of Advent. And then, of course, there's the birth of Christ, celebrated on the 25th of December, regardless of when it actually happened. It's celebrated on the 25th of December. And then that begins something that isn't so much known, the 12 days of Christmas. And the 12 days of Christmas end on January 6th, which is called King's Day, although they probably weren't all three kings. The wise men, that is the day that the wise men departed Bethlehem, having been informed by the angel not to go back and talk to Herod as he had asked about what they had found in Bethlehem, but to go their own way home. And so those are the first 6 days of January are also part of Christmas, just as Durga Puja goes on for a number of days and other worships go on for a number of days. The worship of Christ in the deep Christian tradition is a month or so before the Christ appears. That's the Advent calendar. And then Christmas Day itself, and then the rest of the 12 days of Christmas. So it's very dear to me because I was brought up with it so spiritually, and because my late wife and Marjorie and I shared Christmas. She was a cradle Catholic and enjoyed Christmas extravagantly. So I'll see you, whoever shows up for tomorrow, and then for these other two worships, the Christmas Eve worship and then Mother's birthday celebration. We'll see you then.
Thank
And
you.
Arati will continue, of course, for those, but there's only a couple of 3 people that come to Arati in the evening. But it's always there if you, 7 o'clock, 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. That will continue. So if you want to join, it's a lovely way to move into the evening. So, sayonara, everyone. It's so nice we had this time together.
Thank you. Namaste, everybody.
Namaste.
Namaste.